uh, very quickly, so from last week, we've discussed about the basic of the SOGIE, the sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. And there are really just four components to it. So number one is yung biological sex mo at birth. And then yung malalim na kamalayan based on your identity. So kung ikaw ay female or male in your mind or yung sa iyong consciousness. And then we also have the attraction, which can be divided into two, your sexual attraction and then your romantic attraction, and then also your outward expression, appearance, way of talking, and let's say for example yung pananamit mo or yung kabuuan mong look. It can be either feminine or masculine. We've also talked about the spectrum and the continuum of being feminine or masculine at some point in our time. So yun, I'll be opening the floor now to Reverend Joseph San Jose to talk about the source of all evil in reference to oppression and the intersectionality of oppression. So let's give it up for Reverend Joseph.
Okay, so yeah, I'm Reverend Joseph, and I graduated Master of Divinity sa Union Theological Seminary dyan sa Dasmariñas, Cavite. So let's talk about, share ko lang yung, share. Okay. So let's talk about, so last week we talked about what is sexuality, what is gender, identity, and all that. At the same time, well, when we do SOGIE workshop, when I do SOGIE workshop, as what I've mentioned last week, we have a valued added content. Like on the first part, we introduce the concept or the interpretation, the progressive interpretation about the first human being that was created based on the creation story in Genesis. And then the other part, the other value added content is this, the where the oppression of the SOGIE oppression come from. Ang oppression ng mga LGBT, saan ba siya nanggagaling, saan ba siya inuugat. And those two value-added content are usually lumped up together, but we decided to separate this portion on a different class. So that's what we are having today. So for today, we will learn about four things. Yon, saan ba nanggagaling ang oppression at diskriminasyon ng LGBTQ? Saan siya nag-originate? Secondly, learning some important definitions of certain concepts, no, like imperialism, patriarchy, hindi na siguro hegemony, but some concepts about that helps us understand our oppression, the discrimination that we are experiencing. And ito, importante rin na makita natin na merong tinatawag na intersectional oppression. And kung may intersectional na oppression, merong intersectional na liberation, or the movement, intersectional movement for liberation and justice. And then at some point of this conversation today, at some point of this workshop today or lecture, we will have a conversation about our experiences of oppression and intolerance and discrimination, at ano ang pwede nating moving forward. So our reference for today, some of the reference I use for today's class is The Chalice and the Blade. This is a well-known document book for feminists. And this is, ang approach nito, it's a very in-depth analysis and study of anthropology and history. At yun nga, yun yung basically yung sinasagot ng librong yan, ng Chalice and the Blade. Saan ba nanggaling itong system natin ngayon? Model of society where violence, patriarchy is the norm or the acceptable system or model. The other one, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, maganda rin siyang reference. For organized and progressive people, this might be very popular or known. It's manipis lang siyang libro and it's quite easy and fast to read. And lastly, Indecent Theology by Marcella Althus Reed. Marcella is a feminist queer theologian at medyo technical lang siyang magsulat pero ang kanyang pinupunto is on intersectionality, the importance of unpacking sexuality and sexual intimacy, concepts of sexuality into the liberation movement, into politics, economics. Para sa kanya, kailangan pag-usapan ang sex sa usapin ng liberation. So, magandang magandang reference yan si Marcella. So, question. What is oppression and discrimination? Really quickly lang. Anyone? How do you understand oppression or discrimination?
Anyone can just unmute and then tell your name and then you can answer.
Hi, Queen. I think for me, oppression and discrimination is basically making another person's life harder and judging them because they're different than the majority.
Thank you.
Thank you, Queen.
Thank you, Queen. Others? Anyone else?
Power struggle between sa inaapi at ng nangaapi.
Bongga. Yes, has something to do with power between sa oppressor and the oppressed. No? Discrimination. What is discrimination?
I think when one person thinks that he is higher or better because of certain aspects of the person to another person, that's discrimination.
Thank you, Isaiah. Sige, pag-usapan natin lahat yan. So, oppression is basically can be described in related words such as dehumanization, exploitation, abuse, physical or otherwise. Discrimination, tama yung sabi ni Isaiah, no? Discrimination is that one person or one class of people are privileged over another in a way that is arbitrary, no? Hindi reasonable yung pagpe-privilege or yung yung preferential treatment of one class of people over another. Either it can be because of race, because of religion, or whatever other category. So saan ba nanggagaling itong model natin ngayon? For the past several thousands of years, we have a model of we have a social human model that seems to be bent on violence, on oppression, exploitation, abuse, ganyan, no? and it's across the globe, um, independent of culture and religion and race. What seems to be the prevailing model is a model that supports and perpetuates abuse, uh, exploitation, and all of that. So dinidiscuss to ni Rian Eisler dun nga sa librong The Chalice and the Blade. By the way, before I go on, so this is we are talking today is a brief discussion of the origins of oppression and discrimination, particularly specifically on gender, sexuality, on SOGIE. So there might be many things that we will not be able to discuss today. I did attend a SOGIE and SOGIE oppression workshop by Professor Detneri, and that was actually for what? Mahaba yun eh. And ang kanyang ginawa is a very detailed historical approach. So we will not do that. Very broad stroke yung gagawin natin. So at some point, sabi ni Rian Eisler sa Chalice and the Blade, it was not always that humans were patriarchal, male-centered, male-dominated in terms of human communities, human society. There was a time in among humans that we were a more equalitarian, ginamit yung term equalitarian, a more matrilineal society. Matrilineal meaning tinitrace yung lineage ng mga bata o ng mga tao dun sa mother instead of the father. A society that is more communal. At yung kanilang expressions and they saw this based on what was absent sa mga archaeological discoveries, no? There was an absence of paintings, there was an absence of artifacts that glorify violence during that time, the Neolithic Age. And one of the primary discussions is the Minoan civilization sa Crete, the island of Crete, where it is a highly advanced, civilized society that had advanced technology for their time, had a preference for culture, for the arts, for creativity, but their society was very functionally mas may equality or equity among the peoples, and there is no domination of either the female or the male segment of society. Very peaceful and very harmonious yung kanilang civilization. Peace-loving society. Nasa society nila yung medyo liberal in what we may consider today as liberal in terms of sex and sexuality. They had a very free perspective of gender and sexuality. At yung discoveries nga about the Minoan Cretan society or civilization is that there is an absence of this pag-o-honor o pagle-lift up ng violence, ng weapons, there was an absence of mga libingan ng mga tinatawag na chieftains where kasamang inililibing ng mga chieftains or ng mga hari yung kanilang mga asawa o mga slaves. So this was really absent in their society. and most of the Neolithic societies or communities. Until such time, about around 7,000 years ago, 7,000 BCE, Basic Common Era, meron ding mga peoples, uh, particularly the Indo-European or Aryan race. I don't know if you're familiar with them, the Aryan race, um, who was actually a nomadic tribes that started to migrate and to move into Europe. Um, and these nomadic tribes were actually they had a model of society that was a dominator society, what we now understand as patriarchal, male-centered society, or what Rian Eisler calls dominator model of human civilization, actually came from these nomadic tribes, yung mga ano ba nomad sa Tagalog? Tribes na nagmo-move from one place to another. So they started to migrate and to move into Europe and most of the Fertile Crescent. Therefore, nagkaroon ng shift. Nagkaroon ng shift into the kind of human organizing as these tribes started to invade, to conquer territories and other people. Kasi nga ang model nila ng society is very male-centered, dominator, hierarchical. And my guess, hindi to dinidiscuss ni Rian Eisler sa kanyang libro, pero ang suspetsa ko, my assumption is that because this is a nomadic tribe, a group of people moving from one place to another, ang view nila sa mundo, ang kanilang worldview is that the world is a cruel place. The forces of nature are out there to get them. As they move from one place to another, they needed to not just defend themselves, but in order to move to another territory that might have other peoples, they had to use weapons, to use military might to be able to move to another place. And siguro itong mga nomadic tribes, even among themselves, nag-aaway-away sila. That's why nagkaroon sila ng ganong model of society where ang binavalue nila sa kanilang society is brute strength that is attributed to men. That's why among them, the presence of the glorification of warfare, the glorification of weapons as a symbol of religion and symbol of power ay present sa kanila. So about 7,000 years ago, they started to migrate and conquer other peoples. And those people na hindi na-annihilate, hindi na-erase, somehow also adopted their model of civilization, their model of how to organize their society. So by the time that we get to a society of to the more popularly known Sumerian, Mesopotamian, Egyptian civilization, nakikita mo itong mga civilization na ito ay male-centered na, hierarchical na. And their hierarchy is supported by a strong military. So nag-shift, and certainly the Cretan Minoan society nag-decline na rin, no? Nag-decline na rin. And across the many societies and civilizations that we have studied in high school and in college, ayun na, empire na, no? The basics of what we know about empires and about civilizations. It is ruled by a strong male figure. It is highly the rise to defend itself and to invade and conquer other peoples, versus the earlier kind of civilization that is peace-loving, settled in one place, agricultural. Uh, there is a preference for the arts, for creativity, for culture, and yung worldview. The earlier model had a worldview na tinitingnan ang mundo with such mystery, with such awe, wonder, beauty, versus the later model na ang tingin sa mundo ay we need to use brute strength and militarization in order to survive. So nag-shift. So dyan tinitrace ni Rian Eisler kung bakit nagbago. And for the most of what is known to be written human history, it is a history of warfare. It is a history of empires. The rise and fall of empires that are ruled uh, by male kings or male emperors. And question so far? Wala? Okay, let's move on. So I didn't go to the specifics na nung historical. It's sufficient to kasi haba tayo, tatagal tayo. No? It's sufficient to say from the time na nag-shift tayo ng model of society, model of civilization, yun na throughout. Sabi ko nga, from the Mesopotamian to the Egyptian to the Assyrian Empire to the Babylonian Empire, later on to the Roman Empire, and then much later on to the Roman Catholic Empire. Yes, the Roman Catholic Church can be considered as empire. And it is actually the last vestige of the old form of empire, up to the point where we have the Spanish Empire and colonization, the British Empire, and now the seem to be the declining US Empire. At ngayon nga sa Pilipinas, siyempre dumating tong model sa atin, the model of dominator model of society ay nung dumating na ang dumating na ang Spanish colonization sa Pilipinas. Although, dumating na rin sa atin yung dominator model when nagkaroon na tayo ng interaction with some of the Islamic peoples when Islam came to the Southeast Asia, and then we also had interactions with the Chinese, the Chinese Empire. So meron na, pero largely before the coming of Spain, meron pa rin tayong certain level of what Rian Eisler calls a society that is function-based, role-based, meaning power is attributed based on the responsibility of an individual or group, and not based on gender or not based on hierarchy. Kaya noon sa Pilipinas, meron kang datu, that is the political, and meron kang babaylan, that is the more spiritual. And ang function ng power nila is political si datu, spiritual and cultural si babaylan, and most of the babaylans are female. And among the Philippine tribes back then, ang babae may karapatan na mag-inherit ng property ng kanyang magulang. Pwede rin niyang i-divorce ang kanyang asawang lalaki, versus later Western concepts na kung meron mang divorce, lalaki lang yung pwede i-divorce ng asawang lalaki yung asawa niyang babae, pero yung babae hindi pwedeng i-divorce yung asawa niyang lalaki. also, alam na natin, some of us already know that in some of our pre-colonial societies, pre-colonial tribes, we have gender variants where some who were born biologically male can be accepted or are accepted as later on as female members of society, and some of them are mga babaylans, or itong photo nung nandito is actually a photo of a male babaylan called a and even up to now, what we discussed last week, sa Teduray tribe ng Mindanao, we have a tribe in Mindanao that ang understanding nila sa gender, they do not ascribe gender specific identities to a child that is born. Ang tingin nila isang batang ipinapanganak ay gender neutral, tao. The person, as the child grows up, doon nila titignan o obserbahan if the child will grow up to be male and male functioning, or will grow up to be female and female functioning. And therefore, walang problema sa kanila if the child who seems to be male at birth will function or will behave female later on. Wala silang problema doon. And again, that gender for them will be determined at some later point in the child's development, not at birth. So meron tayo niyan even up to now. But again, the patriarchal society that we live today was primarily came from the westernization of our country, of our people. And sad to say, even the Christianization of our country. Yeah. At later, pag-usapan natin, relihiyon ba talaga ang may kasalanan at ang source ng opresyon ng LGBT at ng mga kababaihan, o there is something more to that? May questions ba? Hindi malinaw? Wala? Okay. So let's go to the definition of terms and the mapping of the ideological mapping of oppression. So globally and locally, in majority of human civilizations, nations today, societies today, we have the prevailing consciousness, social, political, cultural consciousness is patriarchal imperialism. What does it mean? So sabi ng professor ko sa New Testament, si Revelation Belunta, Professor Revelation, he defines imperialism as the imposition of a single truth to a plural world, to a diverse world. Ganyan niya kasimpleng i-define ang imperialismo, no? Imperialism ay ang pag-i-impose ng iisang katotohanan sa isang plural, isang diverse na daigdig. Yung katotohanan na yon is systemic, cultural, pangrelihiyon, politics, ideology, gender norms, and so many things, no? Imposition implies that the imposition implies that there is a single and centralized authority na nag-i-impose ng katotohanan na kanyang yung katotohanan niya. So for example, hindi na ako masyadong lalayo. Roman Empire that imposes the Roman truth, the Roman culture, the Roman model of society and power. Sa present day, you have the US, European American culture, system of governance, system of power, at primarily the centralizing authority that imposes this upon the world is, of course, the American government, symbolized by the American president. Once upon a time, when the British Empire was an empire, um, it is the British Empire is even called the modern day mother of all empires, of all modern empires. The centralized authorities is symbolized by the monarch, by the king or queen of the United Kingdom. But the authority is upon the British Parliament, and it's the East Indies Company. The East Indies Company ay yan yung mismong arm niya to go around the world, imposing, colonizing other countries, other peoples. At parte nung pag-impose, yung parte ng kanyang colonization, imperialismo, ay yung pag-impose niya ng British way of life, British culture, British religion. Life, the American democracy. This is the form of culture. This is the best. We are the best. So, so yan.
Ako ata yun.
Okay.
Anyway, so Pastor Joseph, sa makatuwid, when you mentioned about the imposition of a single truth in a plural world, can this also mean that, let's say, for example, a white person saying that whiteness is
Yes.
the better skin color among the
Yes.
tones?
That's part of it. Kaya nga, yung klase ng imperialismo na meron tayo, locally and globally in most places in the world, dahil nga, kung titingnan natin yung kasaysayan, Europe and the US went around the world colonizing people. So bit-bit nila yung pag-impose ng kanilang worldview, yung kanilang relihiyon at kanilang kultura. Ano ba yung kulturang yun? Ano ba yung bit-bit nilang yon? So let's go to so one of the kinds of one aspect of dominant imperialism in our world today is that it is patriarchal, or sinasabi natin it is male-centered. Empire as we have it today is deeply connected to its male-centered, male-dominated consciousness, mindset, culture. And what it basically means is that it is hierarchical, dominated by men, privileging masculinity, men, and particularly heterosexual cisgender male.
Okay. Question, Pastor Joseph. Can this also be interpreted in, I'm not sure if there are any, but anyway, in the culture or in the context of the Chinese tradition of privileging firstborn male,
Yes.
Ito ba can also be interpreted to this?
Yes, kasama yon. Kaya nga ang tawag sa kanya patriarchy. Technically, kaya nga sabi ni Rian Eisler, the appropriate term actually to describe male domination is androcracy instead of patriarchy. Although okay din naman yung patriarchy, but patriarchy, why we have patriarchy is because galing yan sa Roman Empire. Patria, father, the privileging of the father, of the father as the head, the ultimate source of power, source of authority, sa pamilya and sa society. Kaya ang Roman Emperor, tawag sa Roman Emperor is father of fathers. Because in Roman society, the family, the famulus, doon galing yan lahat eh. The famulus is the head of the famulus is the father.
Yeah.
And the head of all families is the emperor. So the father of fathers. So lahat yan. Kaya may patriarchy. Initrace ang lineage and genealogy sa ama instead sa nanay.
So it's not also surprising that when the song of Ariana Grande came out about God is a woman, medyo maraming atag nito, na-disturb in their head, parang ganyan. So that song can also be a form of resistance to this.
One story, in Greece, prior to the Roman Empire, meron silang, I forgot tingnan ko nga, wait lang. Meron silang isang festival or isang story na pinopromote, highly promoted sa Athens. Asan ba yun? Saan sa notes ko? I forgot the actual term. So they have this story, this play. Piniplay nila to. Where ang tanong, there was this one mythological figure na pinatay yung kanyang nanay. And the Roman gods, the council of the Roman gods were discussing among themselves whether kailangan bang parusahan itong lalaking itong pumatay sa kanyang nanay. At majority of the Roman gods argued that hindi siya dapat parusahan kasi walang connection daw ang bata sa kanyang nanay. And the argument is like this. Because Athena, the goddess of wisdom, came out from Zeus without a mother. So may ganun silang and sabi ni Rian Eisler, the reason why they are propagating this story among the Athenians is to perpetuate a system of society that privileges men and gives power only to men. And so weird that it may be, weird to sa nanay when in fact it is the most natural, it is the most evident and natural observable na galing ka sa nanay mo, no? But in order to perpetuate a patriarchal and patrilineal kind of society, the Athenians were promoting this story among them, and she discusses other examples in history on how patriarchy has been perpetuated through various expressions of culture.
I think also for everyone's information. I think since wala pa namang science and chromosomes and sperm and egg cells at that time, what did the ancient people thought about the women's womb or the women's body? Ano ba siya? I mean, kahit galing sa babae ang pagsilang, pero ano ba ang tingin ng ancient people sa babae?
So, one of the discussions of Rian Eisler on the time that we were not yet patriarchal, we were not yet a dominator society, Neolithic Age nga, before the shift, the settled communities, hindi yung nomadic tribes, but the settled societies that were agricultural, that were may mataas na appreciates the culture and the arts have a high regard for women, and their society was actually centered around the mysteries of womanhood. Of course, hindi nila maipaliwanag scientifically noon, but they had this spiritual appreciation of the cycle of menstruation being connected with the cycle of the moon. Kaya mataas ang reverence nila sa babae, at ang kanilang interpretation na ang mundo, ang universe and the natural world somehow is deeply connected to the female body, and that they saw the world as female because the world was giving birth to life, nurturing life. Yun yung before the patriarchal imperial times. That is more a time that is more more agricultural, more starving. They had a high appreciation for women, and they saw the world or nurturing the world. So yon. So patriarchal ang ating imperial world today, but it's also, so before we talk about misogyny and sexism, so our kind of imperialism is, nabanggit ni Jack kanina, it is white, it is hetero and cis, and it is patriarchal. And pwede pa nating idagdag dyan, to some extent, it is Christian. So the kind of imperialism we see in the world is white, hetero, cis, patriarchy, and a little bit Christian. Kasi meron din tayong tinatawag na Christian triumphalism. No, kaming mga Kristiyano lang ang totoong religiyon.
Yes.
Maliligtas, at kami lang ang magaganda. So,
Christian is the only way, the truth, and the light. Yeah.
may ganon. So, impose that the world should cisgendered, has to privilege men. Yan ang ini-impose na katotohanan. And to some extent nga, kailangan Kristiyano. So, the first effects of this is that our society is misogynist and sexist. So, ano ba ang misogyny? From the Greek word mis and gyne, meaning hatred of woman. Hatred, disgust, or disdain of women and anything feminine. And therefore, its byproduct is the superiority of one sex over the another, meaning that the male and the masculine is superior over women and anything that is feminine or female. And therefore, if inferior, if hindi mo kino-consider na tao yung female or anything feminine, therefore it is something that you can objectify, it is something that you can exploit, discriminate, or even destroy. You can eliminate. In the human consciousness kasi, hindi mo sasalangin, hindi mo sasaktan ang isang bagay na ka-level mo o ka-equal mo, na tinitignan mo as ka-equal mo. So the reasons for exploitation, rape, discrimination, or even the murder of minorities is because you think that they are not human beings. They are inferior. They are objects. At nanggagaling nga yan sa pagtingin na mababang uri ang kababaihan. Hindi lang mababang uri. It is something to be hated, something to be disgusted or disdained.
Or to be controlled.
And therefore, kaya mo siya kino-control. Kaya mo siya ini-exploit. And nagmamanifest pa yan, misogyny and sexism, nagmamanifest sa violence against women and children because children, whether male or female, are not yet fully human. That women are domesticated, should only be in the home. So domestication of women and anything feminine. Objectification. Yeah. So, yung misogyny at sexism, bumababa yan into homophobia and transphobia. Bago yon. So, isang example sa kasaysayan, isang example ng a form of misogyny ay galing kay Confucius. It is the law of nature that women or a woman should be held under the dominance of man. Diba? So sabi ng isang well-revered Chinese philosopher. So bumababa na yan sa homophobia, transphobia, biphobia, and that these phobias are irrational fear, hatred, and disgust of anything that is not considered to be male. And not heterosexual.
So I have a question, Pastor Joseph, very quickly in terms of misogyny and sexism. So in the context of, let's say, for example, cis male and female, ang babae at lalaki, yung straight, why do we think that if, let's say, for example, a woman who wants to have a control over her body, let's say, for example, sa kanyang pananamit ng maikli or pananamit ng medyo mas revealing, why do you think na may general disagreement on it, and why is it that the male would always want to say na magtakip ka nga, nakakahiya ka, ganyan, dapat hindi yan ang gawa mo? What are your thoughts on that?
Babalik pa rin tayo dun sa mahabang kasaysayan na una, lalaki lang ang may sexual agency.
Mm-hmm.
Lalaki lang ang may privilege sa sex.
Ang may karapatang lumigaya.
Ang may karapatang lumigaya, ang karapatang may orgasm. Kaya din, that is also the reason why there is almost no historical writing or record. Meron siguro somewhere, pero almost wala about lesbians or women-to-women sexual relationship, because hindi iniisip ng male society, male-centered, male-dominated society na merong sexuality ang babae or meron siyang kakayanan to have pleasure on sex. And therefore, kung hindi sexual may dalawang implication yan. Therefore, kung hindi sexual si babae at sexual lang si lalaki lang ang may karapatan dun sa katawan ng babae as a sex object.
Mm-hmm.
At kung may karapatan ako sa katawan ng babae bilang sex object, may karapatan din akong sabihin kung ang kanyang pananamit, ang kanyang pagkilos ay sexual or hindi sexual. So
I think we have a question with
yes.
Mariqueta. Are you raising your hand?
Yeah, you can just call me Queen. Sorry.
Hi, Queen.
Connecting to that question, is it connected with the fact when it comes to the topic of like rape? So, for example, yesterday I just saw a post that went viral about this guy who made a joke about a meme about like a 6-year-old little girl and the dick of his. Sorry for the word. Am I allowed to use that word? Pero
yes, sure.
Go ahead. Yes.
For like the dick of the tito, the ninong, and it's so well, one, for me, I find it disgusting as a human being, not only as a woman. Kasi like, no matter what the context is, rape is not a joke, rape is not funny, and the idea is there are still men who found it funny, who had to give their laugh reaction, the heart reaction, and I'm glad there are guys who find it disgusting too, but there is also stigma within when it comes to the topic that, for example, it's very common for incest rape in the provinces for little girls, and when they speak out, like, the shame is still on the little girl, even though yung kakahiya ng pamilya iisipin, kailangan hindi nagsusumbong, then pag siya pa yung sinisisi even though nangyari sa kanya nung bata siya. So is that also like connected rin with, I mean, patriarchy when it comes to rape, pedophilia, or no matter, because even, the little girls, it's not her fault. It will never be the victim's fault. So is that also like part of it, of misogyny, and especially in the family?
Yes, it is still part of it. It is malalim, no? Remember, the patriarchy, our patriarchal dominator society goes way back even before the Roman Empire. It goes way back before Moses. At the start of what we have learned to be written written human history, starting with the Sumerians, the Mesopotamians, the Egyptian civilization. Malalim na ang inuugat ng patriarchal at dominator kind of consciousness sa atin, at nasa DNA natin yan in a way. Kaya may ganyan pa rin siyang expression sa panahon natin ngayon. I mean, it's still part of patriarchy. Why? Kasi babalik pa rin yan sa pagtingin na ang babae at ang bata ay hindi mo equal, hindi mo kapantay. Therefore, dahil hindi mo siya kapantay, pwede kong gawin ang kahit anong kung gusto kong gawin, sabihin, sa bagay na hindi ko kinoconsider na tao at kapantay ko. So, it still goes back to that kind of male, masculine-centered, dominant culture. Despite development of our societies right now, no, malalim pa din yan. Rape culture, why there is still rape culture.
I think Pastor Joseph also, if I may add, there's a certain amount of aggression that the male counterparts towards, the male towards the female counterparts who want to have control over their body, is because they do not, male or some male do not want the other females to rise to the pedestal. I correct me if I'm wrong. Is this something na like if the male has the control towards their body, na pwede silang magtanggal ng damit, or they can talk about sex, while ang mga female dapat malumanay, hindi dapat bastos, tapos napaka-reserve lang. Does that have a relation to the male do not want the females to be their equal?
Yeah, in a way, kasi because if the female people already have control over their bodies, then they can say no. Then they can do not have to subscribe to
or submit
to whatever men are saying, or whatever men thinks about how sex or how women should be. So the man loses control over what he wants to do with the female body.
And the last thing that males do not want is the removal of their control. Isaiah, you're raising your hand. Isaiah. Did you raise your hand?
Ay, sorry. There, may question po ako. Kasama po ba sa sexism or misogyny yung nabanggit sa Bible na husbands submit to your wives? Ay, sorry. Wives submit to your husbands.
Go girl, sige.
Yes,
Good question.
It is, yes. The Bible was the different books of the Bible were formed within a dominator, male dominator model of society or culture. So there are majority of the parts of the Bible will have patriarchal and misogynist kinds of passages.
Or male
Although-
privileging. Male privileging.
Male privileging. Although Rian Eisler did discuss that Jesus and the first followers of Jesus went against that kind of model of society. Pero yun nga, as the different Christians antong dito, moved away from the model of Jesus, nag-adapt sila ng mga elements of the Roman Empire. And particularly Paul, some of the letters that were ascribed to Paul pero hindi naman siya ang nagsulat, meron ka ng makikitang mga passages doon that is moves away from the radical equality and inclusion that was preached about ni Paul at ni Jesus.
Pastor Joseph, is it also safe to say that yung tinanong ni Isaiah kanina came from the assumption in the Hebrew Testament that the woman came from the rib of the man of Adam.
Yes. That interpretation, the interpretation that the woman came from a rib, taken from a rib, even though it's not. It's not if you go to the original Hebrew. So, but the interpretation that was perpetuated that the woman came from the rib certainly is a story that has been used to perpetuate inferiority of women. Although nireclaim na yan ng some feminist theologians, ano yung joke nun? We are the superior gender or the superior sex because we came from a living being while man came from dirt. So may ganong pag-reclaim niya. Let's move on. Meron tayong portion about religion on that. Transphobia, heterophobia, homophobia, heteronormativity, meaning the only acceptable kind of sexuality is heterosexuality. The only kind of gender is cisgender. Therefore, those are the privileged. Those are the normal. Those are acceptable. And those that does not fall into heterosexual, cisgender identity or behavior or attraction are therefore inferior, are therefore something that you can abuse, something that you can discriminate, something that you can oppress, someone that you can murder or kill, because again, they do not fall under what is what empire considers to be acceptable. So ano lang ba ang punto niyan? Ang punto niyan is that ang opresyon ng LGBT ay nag-uugat sa opresyon ng kababaihan.
Mm-hmm.
The oppression of LGBTQ people or any sexual or gender minority ultimately has its roots on the oppression of women and of anything that is feminine. Of course, we recognize that there are certain discrimination, certain experiences of oppression that is unique to LGBTQ, but we cannot separate the LGBTQ struggle from the struggle of women. Kasi doon nag-uugat yun. Yung misogyny, as you see, it comes from patriarchy or androcracy, going down to misogyny and sexism, the hatred of anything feminine and female, and therefore is the hatred of those who do not subscribe to that, which is the gays. A gay who you are a man, but you want
Very
to
effeminate.
be you're effeminate, you want to be female, or for the trans people, or lesbians trying to, in the perception of the empire, a lesbian wants to be male, but you cannot be male. You are trying to supplant.
Because you don't have the phallic.
Oh, you don't have the phallic.
So you're not equal. Yeah.
So nag-uugat talaga sa misogyny, no? The homophobia, transphobia, nag-uugat siya sa misogyny. Even as we have some unique experiences of discrimination separate from women's oppression. And so, the liberation of women, to some extent, is the liberation of LGBTQ people. And the liberation of LGBTQ people is the liberation of women from heteronormative oppression, domestication, and discrimination. Ano ba 'tong mga heteronormative? Kasi sa queer articulation, queer theology, queer theory, umaalis na siya dun sa konseptong kailangang may stereotype ka o meron kang norm ng kung paano ba ang isang babae o paano ba ang isang lalaki. So, kaya in a way, ang liberation ng LGBTQ, not privileging a certain gender or sexuality norm, also liberates women from being boxed, being domesticated on a certain, that women have to be only a certain way. Ano ba to? So in a way, LGBT people has to be first and foremost feminist. Kung LGBTQ ka, hindi pwedeng hindi ka feminista. Okay? And women feminists would have to recognize that the oppression of queer people also reflect their own oppression. Because even among the feminists, there are feminists who actually do not consider, there was a time in the history of feminism and LGBTQ liberation na ayaw ng mga feminista sa mga lesbian. At some point, na-accept nila ang mga lesbian. Ngayon naman, ang ayaw nila, mga trans women.
Trans women.
They do not consider some feminists do not consider trans women as women. So, at some point, feminists has to see that the oppression of queer people also reflects their oppression. And ang ano dito, magkaugat ang oppression at ang liberation nating dalawa, no, ng women and ng queer people. May nagtaas ng kamay, may
Meron ba?
question, parang may nag-chat.
Meron ba?
Does it follow?
Does it follow that you shouldn't call yourself a feminist if you don't support LGBTQI causes? So again, Jack's question is, does it also follow that you shouldn't call yourself a feminist if you don't support LGBTQI causes?
Of course. Kung alam mo na yung nararanasan mong opresyon at kung alam mo na yung iyong liberation ay may kadamay, ay nagsispill over to other minorities, bakit hindi mo, if your feminist perspectives and your feminist oppression also involves other minorities, why will you not support the cause of the other minorities that are experiencing your kind of oppression. So hindi ka pwedeng, at least sa akin.
And it's also also good to acknowledge that there are females who still follow the patriarchal tradition. I mean patriarchal tradition of kailangan susunod pa din sa magsasubmit pa din sa lalaki or would not follow the liberal quote unquote way of living. So feminists can have many genders. I mean, I can be feminist.
A woman, it's not because you're a woman,
you're a feminist. Yes.
You're a feminist. It also doesn't mean that because you're a man, you are misogynist. There are a lot of men who are feminists, who take up the feminist cause. Because, ito rin, the liberation of men for gender norms, the liberation of men from heteronormative toxic masculinity can come from the liberation of women, the liberation of queer people. Again, babalik ka dun sa part na what feminist and queer liberation does is hindi na tayo inilalagay sa isang uri, isang kategorya, isang type of how should a man be, how should a woman be, how should LGBT should be. If that is the projection, that if that is the goal of society, of how society should be, then you also liberate men from toxic masculinity. You also liberate men from trying to conform to a certain kind of masculinity.
Bawal umiyak, bawal maging malambot, bawal maging musician, kailangan nasa military ka, kailangan ka matikas ka, ganyan. So dapat ma-free din sila doon. Sorry, question. Queenie, I have a quick clarification. When you mean TERF, what does it mean? Sorry.
No, sorry. For what I know, it's trans radical like feminists. So there are feminist women who thinks, I mean transgender in general, they think that trans men are not, they just did that, they identify as trans to escape the patriarchy, and they're just radical feminists who says that trans women are not women, the usual thing they say, but they're really more against with, especially with trans men, because they think, oh, now you have that, especially trans men who transitioned, who went to T, they have that mindset that, oh, you just did that just to escape the patriarchy. Now you have like, you know, you're quote unquote passing. Sorry.
Sige, pag-usapan natin yan in a few slides more. So, ngayon, nag-i-emerge naman ngayon yung tinatawag nating intersectional oppression. No? While there are gender and sexuality specific kind of oppression, we know that oppression is not, it's not one thing. And even the gender specific oppression is actually ranked based on class, on social, on economic class. Kasi for example, pag tinignan kita bilang isang bakla, titignan kita, yes, bakla ka, pero ang tinitignan ko sa iyo din para i-discriminate ka o i-oppress ka, mukha siyang edukado. Mukha siyang mukha siyang nakapolo, decente, nakapolo, siguro nagtatrabaho to sa magandang kumpanya, versus someone na pag may nakita akong baklang ay parang mukhang madungis, mukhang mahirap, ang pananalita at pagkilos ay parang hindi edukado. So the oppression at first and on the face value might be gender and sexuality specific, but then it is being ranked based on how we perceive their economic and social class. No? So yun ang isang lutang na intersectional na opresyon. Ito nga, so nakikita natin dito, those in the inner circle, if you as a person will fall, lahat ng categories mo will fall into the inner circle, meaning ikaw na ang pinagpala ni Lord. Ikaw na ang pinaka-privileged. Right? So kung ikaw ay isang lalaki, you are white or European American, Anglo-American. Kung isa kang may pera, edukado, nakapag-aral, wala kang disability, you are an English speaker, bata, heterosexual, and to some extent Kristiyano ka, you are Christian in a Christian-dominated country, then ikaw na ang pinagpala ni Lord. You are the one with the highest power and privilege in that society or in our world. So maglalaro ang iyong privilege if there is anything that does not fall within the inner category. And if all your categories are on the outside, ikaw nang isinumpa ng mundo. Lahat ng sumpa ng mundo, tinanggap mo na. Kung ikaw ay hindi maputi, kung ikaw ay high school lang ang tinapos or elementary lang ang tinapos galing sa mahirap na pamilya, kung ikaw ay sabihin
may edad na, ikaw ay Bex, ikaw ay golden gay
trans, barok-barok ang English mo, tapos siguro deaf mute, o kaya pinanganak na walang kulang ang daliri, mga ganyan. Diba? Differently abled or may disability. Kung ikaw ay HIV positive or negative, so may ganung intersectional na oppression. So that's why also we say, for better clarity, some of the most oppressed peoples in the US are Black trans women.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the most murdered LGBTQ are trans women who are also sex workers.
Mm-hmm.
They are sex workers because they are also lower middle class or poor. So yon, di ba? Ano pa bang intersection? Kung intersectional pa, hindi ka masyadong oppressed nga kung isa kang baklang masculine.
Yes.
Edukado, BPO worker, manager sa BPO. Diba?
Versus effeminate.
Versus effeminate, yes.
Effeminate na walang masyadong mataas na antas ng natapos and hindi manamit ng ayon sa quote-unquote fashion.
Mm.
So Pastor Joseph, also to note, in reference to trans women or trans in general. So when you mentioned about the class, so mas mataas ang pagkiling ng general public to trans women who have already transitioned versus to trans women or trans people who do not have the capacity and do not have the capacity to look the identity. Tama ba yun?
Yes. I mean, Congresswoman...
Yung pagbabaeng-babae na versus trying.
Yes. So in the trans community, you have those who are passing, who can pass. Actually, medyo derogatory term yan eh. Passing off as a biological female.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, mas kasi nga hindi napapansin na trans sila. Di ba? Hindi mapapansin na sila ay trans woman, or mapansin man na trans woman, hindi masyado. Di ba? Hindi masyadong pansin. And hindi siya tinatanggap on the sense na dahil maganda siya or something, but on the
money.
notion, it's not even the money. It's just that, akala ko kasi babae siya. Diba ganon? So, pero pag nalaman na trans na siya, medyo may konting kabig. Ay, hindi tunay na babae. Ganon. So one example nga is Congresswoman Geraldine Roman. Sino pa ba mga famous trans woman? Sino to? Sino yung sa America? Yung athlete?
The model?
So basta yan, yung mga, if you have the means to transition and to really pass to the standard of womanhood of our society, then hindi ganon katindi yung animosity sa iyo ng
pero may
mga tao.
discrimination pa rin.
Pero may discrimination
Yes.
pa din pag nalaman nilang trans ka. Pag halata nila na trans ka. Kasi ang magiging discrimination mo na lang kung hindi nila alam na trans ka, ang discrimination mo ay bilang babae kasi akala nila cisgendered woman ka. So gano'n.
So in reference naman sa, let's say for example sa sexuality, Pastor Joseph, in the intersectionality, if let's say for example you are in the US, tapos you are Asian, tapos you're queer, tapos you are effeminate, and let's say for example your profession is a drag queen, mas mahirap yon, no, I think, kasi in a society dominated by white and
Yes.
Christian belief, quote and quote.
Yes. Totoo yan. Okay, so punta tayo sa itong sinasabi nating internalization of oppression and discrimination. So, yan, sabi ni Paulo Freire na nagsumulat ng Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And this is not just him. I mean, many other sociologists and political analysts, that among the oppressed class, the marginalized class, there is a strong tendency to internalize oppression and to have the mentality of the oppressor. So nagmamanifesto in two ways. Either the oppressed or the marginalized will accept their oppression. Ang example nito ay si Mother Ricky Reyes at yung ibang mga Bex na LGBT na pag nagiging national issue na naman ang SOGIE or same-sex marriage, may makikita ka mga nagko-comment ng mga LGBT na
wag na, tinanggap na tayo ganyan.
LGBT ako pero I don't support SOGIE anti-discrimination bill. LGBT ako pero wag na nating igiit ang karapatan na magpakasal. Ganito na nga tayo. LGBT na nga tayo, nagaganyan pa tayo. So, yun, internalizing, accepting the oppression, the discrimination that was imposed upon you. Accepting the norm, the dominator norm and culture of society. The other way that it manifests itself naman is at usually magkadikit yan eh. The other expression naman is yon, kapag nakaahon ka na sa hirap, kapag natanggap ka na i-internalize mo yung value system or yung mentality ng oppressor. So ikaw mismo, you will oppress your own oppressed tribe. Yung sarili mong uring i-oppress mo with the same mentality of those who were oppressing you.
So oppressed turning oppressor.
Yes, the oppressed becoming the oppressor. So anong example niyan sa mga maralita, halimbawa, yung tinatawag nating from rags to riches. No, someone na nanggaling sa hirap, nakaahon sa hirap, dahil feeling niya talagang individual choice lang ang pag-ahon sa hirap, later on, dahil mayaman na siya, dahil may kaya na siya, yung mentality na magsumikap ka, yung mentality
Kasalanan
na
mo yan.
kasalanan mo yan, kaya ka mahirap.
Ako nga, ganyan lagi. Ako
Oo.
nga.
So, without taking into consideration the systemic and social system that we have.
And lived experience.
No? Yan, kung bakit yung mga dating mahirap na nagkaroon ng sariling kumpanya, all of a sudden, sila din mismo will do unlawful labor practices.
Maganda din yung minention ni Queenie that there are also butch women who have internalized toxic masculinity.
Yes.
Go, Pastor.
Yun, kasi mini-mirror eh.
Dahil one of the boys ka na.
Oo. Kasi either trans man ka or
lesbian ka.
Or butch lesbian a woman, tinitignan mo dahil ang kanilang gender identity or gender expression is masculine. So they will look at their environment. How can I express myself? How can I express myself in the way that I see myself as a man or as masculine? So pagtingin nila sa environment nila, it is an environment of violent men. It is an environment of the privileging of men. It is an environment of machismo.
Yeah.
And it's what makes you a man is a man who objectifies women, exploits women,
who do locker room talks. So
dahil yun yung nakikita nila sa environment nila, yun yung imi-mirror nila na expression ng kanilang SOGIE, ng kanilang sexual expression or kanilang gender identity. But then of course there is that I would also put into wala kasi ngang education about SOGIE, about this, about oppression, discrimination, internalized oppression. Hindi naman nila ito na pag-uusapan. Hindi naman nila ito na so kaya nagkakaroon ng internalization of the oppressor mentality or the acceptance of victimization. So the question of sa relihiyon ba nang gagaling ang SOGIE oppression, hindi ko naman dinideny. Pero kung ititrace nga natin siya muli sa dinidiscuss ni Rian Eisler, I think religion was shaped by the lived experience of the tribes and the civilizations who valued strength and violence as a way of survival and as a way of prosperity for their people. And therefore, it spilled over to the expression of their religion and their culture. Dahil ang worldview nila ay kailangan militarismo, kailangan male strength. Therefore, the expression of their religion became male, became masculine. Their different gods became male and masculine.
And also, is it also safe to say that when the Bible was formed,
it was already a society, a nation, a people that is already informed
patriarchal
by their kasi ang people of Israel, hindi naman sila, while they have certain uniqueness, ethical and moral uniqueness within the context of their time, they were still influenced by the civilizations that were around them. And therefore, meron pa din, kahit may nakikita tayong elements of a more equal, a more just, a more appreciation of women in the Bible, mas malaki pa din yung elements of a patriarchal, mas malaki pa din, mas marami pa din yung patriarchal elements sa Bible. Particularly the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
But religion per se is neither, it's not necessary, one could say, entirely patriarchal, because there are elements of religion, anumang religion to, whether the Abrahamic religions or the Buddhist religion or the there are elements that are patriarchal, there are elements that are more appreciation of women, more equal, more just. At dinidiscuss nga ni Rian Eisler, the book of the Chalice and the Blade is not a theological book. It is a book of anthropology, an analysis of culture and history, tracing why we now have a dominator society. Pero dinidiscuss dun ni Rian Eisler, there was a blip in our known history when a peasant Jew in Palestine some 2,000 years ago went against this dominator model of society.
The Roman Empire.
And particularly the Roman Empire and the Jewish temple religion. In the way that Jesus lived and in the ways that Jesus taught and the ways that Jesus actually denounced the powers and the structures of the society was notable in the sense that Jesus actually, and to some extent Paul, were radical subversives during their time. They espoused compassion, they espoused justice, they espoused an egalitarian kind of society versus what was existing in their time. Jesus welcomed women. Jesus associated with women. Jesus and Paul empowered women. And for the first 100 years of Christianity, it was a group of people that was totally revolutionary, that they threatened the entire Roman Empire and the Jewish temple structure. Mm-hmm. Trying to model an earlier model of society that was more peaceful and more communal, more equal. And kung titignan nga natin sa ating history, even society, kahit na patriarchal, imperial, male-centered, white ang ating at ang Kristyanismo ay naging oppressor na. Okay, the institutional church has become an oppressor. There are resistance within the religious group, within the context of religion. There has been resistance against the political and the religious oppression that is the religious and political systems of oppression that was prevailing. And I just chose a few personalities. Martin Luther King Jr. was actually a pastor.
He's black.
And he's black. Hindi na-highlight yung fact that he was actually a pastor. Ang alam lang natin, civil rights personality siya, civil rights hero siya, that was killed. But he was actually pastor, and his civil rights activism was motivated by his faith. A famous slave hero, si Harriet Tubman, is actually a very religious person, to the extent na nagke-claim siya that she has visions of God. But she fought during the Civil War, and she also liberated many of her
Slaves.
sa Pilipinas, ano ba, Dagomburza, si Hermano Pule, si Bonifacio, ang katipunerong si Bonifacio was known to be a very
Religious person.
religious person. Meron nga siya mga anting-anting. Maraming katipunero naniniwala sa mga anting-anting at mga bertud, no? And in the LGBT community, MCC was the first Christian denomination with the gay liberation movement.
In the US.
In the US, but MCC was also the first largest LGBT organization globally. It is the first largest global LGBT organization that was faith-based.
Mm-hmm.
That
pronounced homosexuality is not a sin.
Yes. Yeah. And the legacy of MCC is it forced other churches to wrestle with the reality of the LGBT people within the church, within the evangelical churches. Dahil meron ka ng church na at mga pastor na lumalabas sa TV na it's okay to be gay and Christian. So how will the other churches will react to that? How will they respond to that? As early as the 70s. So while yes, we acknowledge the many atrocities of Christianity and other religions, we recognize that the church has been an oppressor, has been an empire in and of itself. There are pockets within this religious context that are trying to move away from that model, trying to reform and transform religion to a more liberating, a more compassionate kind of spirituality. At ano ba itong nakita ko sa Facebook, sabi, yung mga galit daw sa aktivista, bakit yung mga galit sa aktivista ay Kristiyano? Hindi ba't ang leader nyo ay ang pinaka-famous na aktivista?
Is Jesus.
No less than Jesus Christ.
So, Pastor Joseph, is it safe to say that the key in shifting the patriarchal or the patriarchy in religion is through, kasi the Bible is already printed and published in so many different versions and languages. So it should be from the person's interpretation.
One is that speaks about social justice, about compassion, especially sa Christian Bible in terms of the gospel and some of the letters of Paul. You start to reassess and look at the gospel and the letters of writings in the context of what they were saying about social already there. And then the other part is it has violent passages. Because you can only reclaim something and you can only use something for the good if you also acknowledge what is bad, ano yung masama dun sa part na yon. And of course, pag in-acknowledge mo na ano yung masamang parts ng Bible, then don't use it to exploit, abuse. Don't use the Bible to abuse, exploit, and oppress others. So, isang feminist theologian, si Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza, meron siyang tinatawag na hermeneutics of suspicion or interpretation of suspicion. You have to always have this mindset that the Bible is patriarchal.
Mm.
So you have to take into consideration whenever you interpret the Bible, you have to be aware of the patriarchal Bible so that you may be able to interpret it in a more life-giving, life-sustaining way. The other thing that feminists and queer theologians do is to have a more variety image of God. We have hindi natin sinasabing mali yung God as king, God as father, God as warrior, as almighty. Pero baka naman dahil yun at yun na lang yung ating concept and image of God, baka tignan natin yung mas marami at mas diverse na image of God. Kasi nasa Bible din naman. God as mother is in the Bible. God as woman is in the Bible.
God as a nurturing.
God as nurturing. The name of God as El Shaddai. El Shaddai. Ang etymology actually niyan, if ititrace mo ang tradition niyan, it's actually not translated as mighty one. It's actually El Shaddai, the God who is many-breasted. Diyos na maraming suso. So, maybe there is this way that we can look at God now equally, not just as king, not just as father, but equally as mother, nurturing, gentle, tender, peace-loving instead of warmongering.
Fire and power.
Yeah. So, yan ang aspect of religion. I think religion is not per se the root cause of it certainly has a lot of contribution to discrimination and oppression. But it can also be a powerful force for liberation, as we see with Martin Luther King, the Civil Rights Movement, the LGBT movement, Oscar Romero, Archbishop Oscar Romero, and the Latin Americas who gave us liberation theology. It can be a powerful force to reclaim religion and reclaim society to be a more loving, a more compassionate kind of society. Recognizing the inherent value of women and all other gender and sexuality minorities, all other sectors.
Mm-hmm.
So move on. At yun din sinasabi ko, kaya sinasabi ko hindi siya primarily sa Kristiyano because you have non-Christian societies, hindi sila Kristiyano, hindi sila Muslim, hindi sila Hudyo, pero homophobia and transphobia exist in these countries. Because patriarchy is not specific to the Abrahamic religions. Patriarchy, the male dominator model of society, is present even in non-Christian societies and cultures. Kaya kanina nga, di ba nabasa natin, Confucius, a famous philosopher, is misogynist. Very misogynist. So sa mga countries na to, China, Taiwan, and Japan, ayaw nila sa same-sex marriage, ayaw nila sa LGBT, hindi dahil based on the religion. It is based on, andun sila sa idea ng father, male mag-aasawa ng babae, kailangan mag-anak ng lalaki kasi patrilineal din sila ng kanila sa pangalan ng tatay to reject same gender, same sex relationship.
But congratulations to Taiwan, they already have same-sex marriage equality.
Yes, pero it was still
hard-earned
battle. and campaign.
Sorry, may question po ako,
So,
Reverend Joseph.
yes.
Before we
Go
move
ahead.
on, what's
Yes.
Go
your
ahead,
input
Isaiah.
on Jesus's choice of disciples? Kasi parang lahat sila lalaki.
Yes. Hindi sila lahat lalaki. Ang naisulat, kaya nga sabi ko, there are still traces of, hindi naman dinideny din ni Rian Eisler that Jesus lived within a male-dominator society. So even if Jesus went against the male-dominator hierarchical society and empire that he was in, meron pa ring elements doon na nasa sa kanya at nasa iba niyang mga kasamahan na may elements pa rin ng patriarchy. Ngayon, we have to also consider that what we know was years after the fact of the historical Jesus. At ang nagsulat nito ay some of his followers. But certainly, you can also read in the gospel that there were women followers of Jesus. Those who the people who were there during when he was being crucified were the women. The men were nowhere to be found. And we know about the resurrection or the Easter primarily because of the women, or specifically Mary Magdalene. And we can trace back to some of the writings of Paul, how Paul praised the women leaders, the women deacons, the women, and Paul even acknowledged a woman apostle by the name of Junia in his writings. So we know that the first 100 years, or maybe the first 70 years of Christianity, while there might be really small elements of patriarchy, by at large, the analysis of scholars and even Rian Eisler is that very pro-women si Jesus, si Paul, and the early Christians. And they have a very equalitarian view of society.
It just so happened that
practice.
the written were in male name.
We'll still have elements kasi lalaki lang din ang nagsulat ng mga gospel, and the Paul wrote. So lalaki pa rin naman si Paul.
Like, I mean, siguro contextually, women are not counted, quote unquote, in the Mediterranean times, because only kaya in the feeding of the 5,000, it was only mentioned that there were 5,000, because it was actually 5,000 males plus women and children.
Yes.
So, ganun, I think yun yung context nun, Isaiah. From that, nasagot ba yung tanong mo, Isaiah?
Yeah.
Yes po. All good.
Any other questions so far from anyone? Before we move. Teka, wait. May sinabi si Queenie. In connection with that, is there any truth in the Da Vinci Code? Because it was mentioned, I think, that there's a book of Mary in the Bible, and she was also a disciple, but she was made into a prostitute. Sagot, Reverend Joseph.
Siyempre fiction naman si Da Vinci Code, si librong Da Vinci Code, using some controversial elements of scholarship, pero some of the truths there, we really don't know. There is no basis for saying that Mary Magdalene was the wife of Jesus. Wala tayong almost
hard
evidence about that. There is a gospel of Mary Magdalene, but that gospel was like the other gospels na kasamang na-discover No, the Gospel of Thomas is actually a very very early gospel. Can even be considered, should have been part of our gospels.
But did not make the cut.
Yeah, did not make the cut. But itong Gospel of Judas, Gospel of Mary Magdalene, Gospel of the Gospel of James, of the early years of Jesus, ito yung mga nagsulat nito ay yung mga later Christians in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th century na nagwa-wonder. Ano nga bang naging partisipasyon ni
Mary
Mary's
Magdalene.
Magdalene? So ano na to? What do you call this? Filling in the gaps. The gaps, the things that we do not know about Jesus, ay yung iba din mga speculative So nagsulat sila. Siguro si Mary Magdalene siguro siya yung beloved apostle na sinasabi. Mga ganyan. Siguro nung bata si Jesus, ganito siya nung bata siya. So may nagsulat. Pero hindi yung historical accuracy niya is questioned because ang layo niya na sinulat sila malayo na from the historical Jesus.
So Joseph, is it safe to say that Mary Magdalene is a disciple of Jesus Christ because sa kanya nagpakita nung resurrection? Or there are other accounts also that can mention that Mary Magdalene is a disciple?
Well, Mary Magdalene was a disciple kasi na-mention naman siya na she was there in most of the ministry of Jesus, the moving ministry of Jesus. In the Gospel of Luke, hindi siya prostitute. Ano na yan?
Charot-charot.
There was a tradition, interpretation yan at some point in the Middle Ages or early 5th century, ganyan. At some later point, may preacher na brilliantly naisip niya, si Mary Magdalene yung adulteress dun sa Gospel of John. Yung bang, ano yun?
Umukol ng unang bato.
Yung walang may kasalanan, siya ang unang bumato. So, ganyan. Or some other interpretation about Mary Magdalene being a prostitute. What we have in the Gospel account is that in the Gospel of Luke, Mary Magdalene was a woman possessed by 7 demons that Jesus healed or exorcised. And after that healing, Mary Magdalene followed Jesus throughout the rest of the ministry of Jesus. And the mere fact that 40 years, 50 years, 80 years after the historical Jesus and the historical Mary Magdalene, she is well mentioned in the gospel writings means she is an important and prominent disciple in the Jesus movement. At kilala. So, and that's why we know there are other women disciples.
And so to answer also, yung pagre-reduce kay Mary Magdalene as a prostitute came in as the byproduct of patriarchal interpretation of the Bible. Tama ba?
Or much bigger than that, nang naging patriarchal na ang church ng Christianity.
Okay.
As it moved away from the original teachings and original practices of the early Christians. When it was already given power, when it was already made as a state religion by Emperor Constantine.
So ayaw nilang maganda si Magdalene.
So ano na yan? Well, yeah. Pero hindi yun yung example. The clearest example of a readoption of a hierarchical and patriarchal model within the church, within the Christian religion, is nung si Junia that was clearly named as an apostle, and the name Junia was clearly a female name under Greek semantics, Greek grammar. dahil sobrang in-depth, sobrang malalim na yung pag-adapt ng patriarchal consciousness ng mga later Christians, hindi nila matanggap. There
Kung may
must be
babae.
there must be a grammatical error with this letter of Paul. I think it is in Romans. This letter of Paul to the Romans. So they had to correct it. They had to made an explanation about it because they could not imagine that there was a woman apostle named no less by Apostle Paul.
Any other questions so far? Na-clear ba yun? Sorry, Queenie, na-clear ba yung question mo? Queenie, are you there?
Okay. So,
Go.
medyo na tayo, more than 2 hours na ating class. Maganda lang pag-usapan natin very quickly, i-facilitate mo na
Go.
Kasi all of these are very historical, theoretical. Ano yung mga lived experience natin ng patriarchy, ng oppression today? Some of the examples, of course, itong walang patid at proliferation ng telenovela na palaging ang legal na asawa at ang kabit ang nag-aaway.
True.
And certainly in real life that happens. Na dalawang babae ang nag-aaway instead of dapat ang awayin nila ay itong lalaki.
Yung lalaki. Correct.
Ano ba mga lived experience natin? Or yan nga sa LGBT community, why among the gay men, they have also internalized toxic masculinity of sa mga aura nila bawal lang femme. No femme, ano to? Wala.
Mask for mask.
Mask for mask.
No femme, no cam.
Kung alam mong halata ka, huwag ka nang mag-message.
Quote and quote preference lang yan. Hashtag preference lang.
So may mga ganon. Those are signs of internalized misogyny.
Sige, let's open the floor for thoughts and views from the Sige, so the questions are, what are your experiences or observations of external or internal internalized intolerance, discrimination or oppression, and or any particular experience of discrimination or intolerance during this time of the pandemic and quarantine lockdown? Siyempre, maiano na lang yun, maitawid na lang yun. Anyone can speak.
Hello. This is Josh.
Hi, Josh.
One of siguro the experience that I've had was in childhood. Kasi it became relevant recently. Which is basically na yung brothers ko would berate me pag malambot yung galaw ko, or particularly pag gusto ko manood ng Sailor Moon. Talagang binawalan nila ako manood ng Sailor Moon. Kaya hanggang ngayon parang yun yung frustration ko. Kaya hindi ko pa siya napapanood talaga.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that was my personal experience sa family na basically they wanted me to be more masculine nga.
And subscribe to the since Joshua, sige, never mind.
Yeah, I am.
Sige, go.
Yeah, it's fine. And it's also funny because I tended to draw, when I draw people, I usually tend to draw women. So they didn't want me to draw girls. So they ended up buying me a book about how to draw manga na focus on men, which backfired kasi maraming... Yeah, I mean, medyo, or yung the bodies, so naging homoerotic din siya. So yun.
Thank you, Josh. Any other thoughts? Just unmute and then say your name. Go, Honey. Just unmute your Honey, go. Honey Simon. Honey Simon, nag-raise ka ng hands. I-unmute mo lang yung yung mic mo.
Ayun.
Ayan.
Yes, hi.
Hi,
Yes,
honey.
sorry. Sorry about that. So, ayun kasi for me, I was being like reconnected because as of the moment, yung family ko kasi, ano ba, my parents are both dead. Though kasi, yung, since we're just three in the family, so I'm the youngest. So, yung brother ko po is the oldest. So, parang ang dating niya kasi sa amin, sa kanila na pinipilit nila ako po na I should be married to like to a man, not to like to a lesbian. Parang gano'n na they're forcing me to do something na hindi naman na kasi siya how do we call that, na hindi siya norm ko na for as of the moment since I already discovered everything. So, yun yung nagiging challenge ko. So, yun yung isang part, maybe, part is dun sa family na rin. So, patriarchal pa rin talaga siya. Since yung father tsaka kapatid ko is the guy. Parang ganun.
So honey, in essence, there are conversations in your family na this is just a question. Mag-try ka muna ng lalaki, parang ganyan ba?
Yeah, it's like I should have go back dating to a guy instead of you dating or living in with a lesbian, something like that.
I see. Yes, very prominent yan in some of the families then, especially when they talk about I am not sure pero parang mas may sorry Queenie, this is just a question. I'm not sure if this is more prominent. Mas hindi tolerant ang families in terms sa lesbian relationship than gay relationship. Sorry, anyone can answer that. Kasi at least as far as mga lagi ko na encounter na stories, na yung family mas sila sa mga babae na hindi magiging pa yan, magiging tag nito, magiging babae, quote and quote babae pa yan pag nakatikim yan ng lalaki, as opposed sa mga gay men, at least nowadays, I'm not sure, hindi rin naman to full, na okay lang yan na maging Becky, at least merong mag-aalaga sa'yo, sa parents, parang ganyan. I'm not sure. Honey.
Yes. Actually, yes, I'm here. Yes, actually, I agree on that. Kasi the problem is that if you're a lesbian, kasi on our resetting right now with my partner, as of this time, on her end, I don't have any issues. Like, yung, kung ano man yung usual na issues as a man, okay na yun. Well, on my part, pag sa akin yun yung nahihirapan, I believe na with some of the female lesbians as well. I've just talked to some of them. They also have like the same experience. Parang it's hard for us for our family to accept it. That's why we're talking about marriage or settling down. That's the problem of it.
Question, honey, bilang ang expression mo ay feminine, tama ba? Hindi butch ang iyong expression. Tama? May mga ganun. Sige. Thank you, honey. Ria. Go, Ria. Ria Faustino. Go, darling.
Yes, hello. I guess before I share muna my experience, I think for my family, hindi naman necessarily mas strict sila sa lesbians kesa sa gays. Kasi from my experience, when I came out to them as someone who liked girls, parang syempre hindi sila okay. Pero nung nalaman nila na yung brother ko, nagkaroon ng boyfriend, they were just as hard to him as they were to me.
To you.
I think it's also because parang yung brother ko lang yung natitirang boy sa family na hawak yung last name namin. So, I think may pressure din sa kanya na i-carry on yung
The name.
The name, yeah.
Mm.
Kaya, hindi ko naman alam kung dahil doon kaya sila. Pero I think, as long as hindi yung traditional na relationship yung ine-expect, hindi sila okay doon.
Mhm.
Pero I guess for ano naman, for my experience as a girl, parang I think na-experience naman to ng lahat ng mga female Asians, yung prating mas strict yung family sa mga daughters kaysa sa mga sa mga sons nila, na yung mga lalaki okay lang sa magulang na gumala-gala.
Good point.
Yeah, na gawin kung ano man yung gusto nila. Okay lang kung hindi sila tumulong sa bahay, pero parating mayroong expectation sa babae na maging masunurin at gawin yung gusto ng mga magulang, at parang merong mas may plano ang mga magulang sa mga anak nilang babae kaysa sa mga lalaki ng pamilya. At mahirap yun, lalo na ngayong yung I guess yung mga generation natin ngayon, parang mas hindi na sila kasing traditional, at nahihirapan yung mga magulang na i-accept na yung mga anak nilang babae gustong I guess gustong maging mas independent at hindi na naghahanap ng buhay na dati nilang ini-expect.
Yun lang, Ria?
Yes, yun.
Very good, very nice yung pinoint out ni Ria kanina in reference to the family last name. I think this is also a byproduct of patriarchal, na ang mga lalaki kailangan na magki-carry ng names nila. So in essence, dapat magkaroon sila ng number 1, lalaking anak. Number 2, kailangan yung anak nilang lalaki magkakaroon ng family para matuloy yung last name. So sometimes medyo hindi acceptable ang magkaroon ng baklang anak, especially kung only boy or only child. So medyo problematic 'yon. Also, yung na-mention din kanina ni Ria na hindi mahigpit yung treatment ng family or ng parents sa boys, because boys will be boys, I think. Medyo nakaka-haggard nga 'yon. Kasi siguro mas mataas ang control na gusto nilang gawin in reference sa female or the female body in general. Thank you, Ria, for that. Queenie girl, paki-unmute ang yung mic.
Okay, sorry.
Ayan.
Actually, I just want to add before I share my experience. I totally agree with Miss Ria and Miss Honey, because I really agree with that, because it's true. It happens talaga. I agree na parang what you said about what do you call this? About yung parang it's not mas mahirap if it's from a lesbian woman than sa gay man. Kasi parang they have this notion na parang if lalaki parang they're decisive, final na yan, di mo mabago. Pero pag woman parang ang baba ng tingin na parang
correct pa.
Oo, yeah. Then pero based on my experience, nakikita ko rin what I see rin na it's harder also for gay men. I mean, on my family, kasi I have a gay uncle. Yung uncle ko kasi, I mean, judging by, like, I have a lesbian tita and I have a gay uncle. So yung lesbian tita ko is like a butch woman. Then I've noticed na parang they're not too hard on her compared.
Say one of the boys, yeah.
They're not too hard on her, like in general sa family ko, or compared to sa uncle ko na who's gay.
Effeminate.
I think it's because na parang I think it's also connected with wider against and more on trans women than trans men. Parang for me, I think my point of view of it is you have this privilege, you have this male privilege, and you decided, like, quote unquote decided to be like this. You decided to take privilege to a woman or be more feminine. So parang why would you let go of that privilege that you have already since birth? So that's how I see it. And ako, for me, when it comes to discrimination, like anything like sexism, I think it would relate on my family run, because I'm the only girl and I'm the middle child. And I've noticed rin na especially my mom is more misogynist. So may internalized misogyny siya and homophobic rin siya. And parang when my brother mentioned about, oh, he's gonna buy a house, then parang he's gonna buy a house, then dun rin ako titira kasi para hindi daw ako kawawa pag iniwan daw ako ng quote-unquote asawa ko. So and I went really against it. Then sabi ko, I can handle myself. I've been independent for so long. I can handle myself. Then sabi niya na parang, no, hindi. Kailangan ganito, blah, blah, blah. So parang, I don't know why, kasi I could somehow accept the ignorance of a man. Somehow I can. Parang it's already given. Pero I can never accept the ignorance of an internalized misogyny.
Very true, yes.
I would never accept that from, like, how do you sleep at night? And that's coming from my mother na kinakawawa ko. Like, parang baba ng tingin mo sa akin, balita ko ako yung naging independent na mas mabata pa sa kanila eh. I moved out early. And when it comes to like LGBT community, like I mentioned, na there are butch women. Because I identify, my gender expression, I'm feminine, like sapphiristic, and I'm a lesbian. So parang there's discrimination when it comes to butch women, like, and especially also gay men, specifically mga effeminate gay men, like who doesn't believe me, who's gonna be like, talaga, bakit? Kasi parang kailangan mag-try ka ng titi muna, baka yan, masarap yan, wag ganun sila. Then butch women will be more likely, talaga, never ako nakilala ng babae din gusto. So sinasabi ko na lang, wait lang, babae ka rin eh. Iba lang ang expression mo, iba lang expression mo.
Correct.
So I think the only difference, I mean, I am gonna acknowledge that there's some things talaga some discrimination na I haven't experienced is because I haven't experienced because of my I'm financially stable. So parang that I know naman the discrimination is different from someone who's in like someone in a poverty line or someone who earns a little pano. When it comes to that part, parang I don't get that discriminated. Pero it's still a shitty thing na there's also discrimination with your gender expression and your sexual orientation. Then there's also discrimination with your social status. So parang that's the only thing that's
experience mo.
Makes it less worse than me, and I find it really shitty. So yeah, and dun rin sa family ko, like, even though they know, once I reach a level of social status, hindi ka nila papakilamanin kasi you have that privilege of money. So parang that's also part of it. So yeah.
Ng mga layers ng mga issues. Thank you, Queen.
Intersectional talaga.
Any other thoughts from the other audience? Go, Isaiah.
Siguro po just to answer the question, no. Ang aking I've shared this with Kuya Jack and Reverend Joseph before. Ang aking personal experience on internalized intolerance is the fact that walang ginawa ang Diyos na bakla. Or once you choose this kind of quote-unquote lifestyle, you will go to hell. Ganyan. Which still at some point, kahit meron na akong idea on what SOGIE is and what, kumbaga, yung queer theology na tinuturo, meron na akong slight idea with it, it still has an influence to me, kasi nga internalized intolerance na siya sa akin. Na-internalize ko na siya for most of my life. So, it still is a struggle to the point na sinabihan ako ng daddy ko or ng father ko, who is a pastor, na rebelde daw ako sa Diyos. Ganyan. So, because I've chosen this kind of life. So, that is the intolerance that I cannot bear, pero it still is a struggle. Kasi, I remember just recently, a member of the family who I came out to outed me to my parents again. Kasi I'm already out to my parents, but then hindi siya accepted. So, ang status ko ngayon is really discreet. But so natanggap na nila na parang okay, straight na siya ulit, parang ganyan. And I just don't talk about it. But then a member of the family outed me again. So parang naging struggle siya ulit at nabuksan na ulit yung kumbaga quote-unquote can of worms.
Yes.
Yes, can of worms. So I had again a long conversation with my family regarding that. But then internalized intolerance na siya kasi ang sabi ko na lang sa kanila, ang sabi nila which I agreed on is parang nagsisi ka naman na ganyan. Nagbagong buhay ka naman na, nagbago ka na, so wag na nating pansinin. To which I agreed to kasi ang choice ko na lang is okay, sige, since that is how they see me, para lang ako in my thoughts for us not to have another war on this
Conflict.
topic. Yes, conflict. Parang sige na lang. Kung ano na lang yung sinabi niyo, okay, sige, nagsisi na ako. Pero in the back of my head, parang, no, I'm not that kind of person who you think I am. Pero, yeah, so that's it. So, yun yung internalized intolerance.
Hugs, Isaiah, na-miss kita. Na-miss ko yung mga conversation natin. Anyway, with medyo mahirap kasi yung mga conversation in reference to your parents and religion and all. Kasi some parents can be very stubborn since they have a different set of beliefs and stuff. Mai-plug ko lang with everyone. We do have a session called Homosexuality is Not a Sin. I'm not sure if we will do that in Zoom. Pero normally we do that kasi every Pride month. We discuss different sections in the Bible that say that homosexuality is not a sin. So we will advertise that. Hopefully you can participate maybe in Zoom or maybe in actual class. But yeah, yon, haggard yon, Isaiah. Medyo naalala ko talaga yung mga conversation natin. Thank you, Isaiah. Hi, Tim. Tim, go ahead, Tim.
Hello po. I-share ko lang ang aking experience. Nung hindi pa ako familiar, this was back in college, high school college. Hindi pa ako acquainted sa salitang transgender, so I was presenting myself as a soft butch lesbian back then. I really tried hard na maging effeminate, na pa-chicks ba. Para, kasi I was studying in an older school din. So, lago tayo ka na sister. Tapos, si mama, she was very, alam mo yun, sarado katoliko kung tawagin. Tapos, there was a time na, I think it was fifth year, graduation na namin. So, it was usual for her na bugbugin ako. Tapos, alam mo yun, parang binabasahan niya ako ng Bible every day. Na parang sinasabi niya sa akin, Sodom and Gomorrah, gano'n, na parang, kasalanan sa Diyos yan, gano'n. Tapos, may time pa na, I was already working then. Kakagaling kong hospital, binugbog niya ako na parang, sumisigaw siya na, tomboy ka, gano'n. Tapos parang, alam mo yun, parang you're hopeless na, ganito ba ka-intolerant yung mundo na I'm not doing anything wrong. I was just in a relationship with a girl na mahal ko. Tapos parang ganun. Tapos, nung time na yun, hindi pa nga acquainted sa pagiging, sa term na transgender. So, when I got here, and then I started transitioning, parang may time na sinasabi niya na, okay lang sa akin, magkaroon ka ng relasyon na babae, basta wag ka magta-transition. Tapos parang, teka po.
So, nagkaroon ng ibang level yung ano.
Parang, teka lang, option A, option B, teka lang. Yun nga, that was the family side ng intolerance, ng oppression. It was really, really depressing sa totoo lang. Kasi supposedly family and your home should be this a safe space for you. But back then, I have to build my own home inside me para to keep myself sane. Dito naman, in terms of intolerance, I think pagdating sa observation ko lang sa cisgender men, meron akong friends na hindi sila macho, hindi sila siga ba, hindi sila yung nagko-conform dun sa kung paano na
standard masculine.
Yung standard masculine people na parang nanonood ng mga wrestling o mahilig sa sports. They are intellectual people. Pero alam mo yun, may mga kung ibabox ko siya sa idea ng society ngayon, mga pa-chicks ba? So, alam mo yun, napapansin ko rin yun na parang they get judged on that side na parang you don't conform on the society, na hindi ka
soft, you're too soft.
Parang ganun, oo. Parang, alam mo yun, parang ako para sa parang makaka-offend naman yan. Tapos parang, yung idea naman na because I'm a transgender man, nag-try ako mag-conform na parang I present myself na dahil sa dysphoria ko rin, na gusto ko magkaroon ng facial hair. Unfortunately, baby hair lang meron ako ngayon. Alam mo yung kailangan na, yung idea na yung toxic masculinity masyadong nagkalat, naglipa na. I am personally, I feel bad na somehow in the past na practice ko yun, and it's just toxic nga. And it's just really sad na hindi lang sa community, or hindi lang sa gender community, pati sa community natin na sasabi yung toxic masculinity in terms of, alam mo yung kailan ba yung nag-viral yung akala mo something about Barbie?
Sabi ko na Barbie
Ayun. Tapos parang even in the trans men community, parang ginagawa siyang joke na parang lahat tayo na nakakaramdam ng oppression on different levels, pero ginagawa niya yan. So parang alam mo yun.
So kapag hindi ka nag-conform dun sa trans men masculine features and actions,
hindi ka macho.
Sasabihin ko, sabi ko na Barbie ganon.
Oo, parang ganon.
Okay. Yes. Internalized
parang
oppression.
lason.
Yes.
Ayun lang po.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you very much for sharing that. I hope yung story mo with your family will medyo hirap nga din yan. So air hugs sa'yo, Tim.
Thank you.
Sa ibang bansa ka, diba? So hugs for that. Maraming stories of discrimination and oppression, especially internalized one. Syempre, dumadaan yung partner ko, diba? Anyway, okay. One, na-mention ni Tim kanina about yung straight man ka, pero if medyo soft ka kumilos, if medyo hindi ka nagko-conform sa baril-barilan, or kapag hindi ka mahilig sa basketball, ang gusto mo medyo more painting, music, ganyan, sasabihin nila, bakla ka ba? Tapos hanggat sasabihin naman nung person na hindi nga ako bakla, pero i-insist pa rin ng society na ang tanong na bakla ka ba? Kasi hindi nga sumusunod doon sa standard masculine actions, expressions, look, etc. So any other thoughts from the audience? Kung meron pa kayong I think we could do a last one. In fairness, medyo 3 hours. Anyone who would want to share? Wala. Sure? Sure ba kayo? Okay, so medyo dead air na. Okay. Any final thoughts, Reverend Joseph? Nakamute ka ata. Hello? Pastor Joseph, nakamute ka ata. Hindi kita marinig. Nawala. Hindi nag-ano. Nakamute ka ata.
Oh, hello.
Ayan,
Hello.
ayan. Okay, go.
Okay. Si Miss Karen, would Miss Karen want to say anything?
Oh yeah, Miss Karen. Miss Karen, hi. Any thoughts?
Any thoughts? Okay. Well, I'm very fortunate to come from a family that is very progressive and open. My father and my mother, so, and siblings, and their husbands and their wives, right, and their families. So I've been very fortunate. So when I hear about these stories, I really, I'm grieved by it because, I feel like we come into this world in shells, basically. And you don't know whether you're going to be a man or a woman, whatever. And we're put in boxes. And sometimes we're forced to, but we don't have to. None of us have to really be living in a box that somebody creates for us or we create for ourselves. And I'm a very, I'm lay, I'm not clergy, but I'm a very faith-oriented and spiritual person. And I agree with what Pastor Jay said about Jesus, right? And unfortunately, yes, all the various systems, the intersectionality have just decomposed the very essence of what the message is. And if you're a Christian, I think we need to really rethink that, of what the essence of what that original message is. And that is part of what my pro bono work is within the United Methodist Church. Okay. And it's not easy, as you say, religion, but it is also societal and all the intersectionality. And I live in the United States, so we also have racism. And we have, besides all the other things that you had around those multiple circles, but it's coming. And even the whole concept of imperialism, you only mentioned about Western, but there is Eastern imperialism also that exists today that we need to acknowledge also, okay? And I think we need to just be aware of who we are as people, an individual, right? Not just being a Filipino, not just being a man, woman, bi, trans, whatever, just a human being. And what is our role as a human being? As Methodists have this thing of do no harm. And that for me is probably very key, to just be your best self, thrive who you can be, and do no harm. I think that's what I can just share right now, but I've really appreciated all the talks and the very frank conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Miss Karen. Thank you. Say hi sa UMC in the US. Sige, Reverend Joseph, any...
Yeah. So closing things, what we can do is, again, education is very important. As what Paulo Freire said, it is important. Education and awareness building is very important to deconstruct the model now, the model of society, the model of religion, the model of
medyo naglalag ka.
Discriminator, a violent.
Okay, go.
Okay na. Hello.
Go.
So yeah, so education is important. That we need to continuously educate as many people as we are. But education will also be something that is not just intellectual. Education has to be practice-based, experience-based. The things that we learn should not just in our heads, something that we go out there and do something about it, and meet the other people, listen to the others of other sectors and of and to many other social movements for that goal of shift our world, our human civilization to a model that is more compassionate, more loving, society that really takes seriously what we call as common good, the common good for all, regardless of whatever categories we are or find ourselves in, whether gay, bisexual, uh, ano pang mga categories yan. Yun. Kasi nga, I just want to leave and finish this lecture by this quote: queer liberation and queer theologies insist in unpacking the intersectionality of sex, sexuality, gender, and intimacy with the socio-political and economic systems and structures of liberated economically, politically, and socially, includes the revolution and liberation of our collective ways of intimacy and lovemaking. And in the most simplest words of the queer theologian, Marcella Altus Reed, what's love got to do with it? Everything.
Kerry? Okay. Thank you very much for everyone who participate in this Thursday session on our Zoom or digital life learners. Next week, we will have a different topic altogether. We will be posting that on MCC Facebook or Twitter if you, and we have also YouTube and Instagram. Wala pa ka. Yeah, yon. So thank you very much. I know this has been almost 3 hours already, but thank you very much for staying with us. We hope na marami kayong natutunan, and we hope that in your future conversation with many different people na magiging dala-dala nyo siyang bala, well, hindi naman bala, maging dala-dala nyo siyang consciousness into the conversation to be more freeing or liberating for the work of love, justice, and equality. So from Open Table MCC, thank you.
May request ako. I have a request to the participants. So we have a Facebook page. You just search on Facebook, Open Table MCC. So yun lang, lilitaw naman kami, Open Table MCC. It's a page. If you can write a recommendation regarding the topic today. So meron kasing feature doon na, will you recommend Open Table MCC? And then you write whatever you want to write. But can you specifically write your...
Parang rate us.
Rating.
Parang rate us. Yeah.
Your experience about the conversation today. Kung meron kayong time, kung bet nyo lang.
Parang bumaba na din yung mga bashers. Kasi may mga basher kami dun sa rating. So, yung mga anti-LGBT Christian. So, yun. Ayun, so thank you very much and see you next Thursday. We'll have a different setting. Thank you. Bye, Thank you, Jax. Bye, Tim. Bye, Isaiah. Bye.